Hello, everyone. I am Roger Odell, and I'm going to be sort of your host today. We're going to be going over this Flutter from to store here. We have Jay, who's with us. He is one of our GDG members, organizers, the head guy. I don't know how many more ways I can prop him up here, but let me just get into the little presentation there. A little bit about us. You can see the three of us are here. We are missing one, but um, yeah, let's leave it at that. Other ways that you can find us, we have obviously with GDG Community Dev, which is where we're kind of going from here. We also have our own Slack. You can use the link there. We can share that on the chat maybe. If anybody wants to do that. We're also on Meetup. We have GitHub and Twitter. And with that, I'm going to pass this over to Jay and let him get started.
Thanks. So, hi everybody. My name is Jay Whitsitt. I am a. Oh, 1 second. Here, I'm going to kick you guys out so that. There you go. Hi everybody. My name is Jay Whitsitt. I am a mobile developer, currently working for a commerce bank. I do iOS and Android development. Before that, I worked for a startup, also Hallmark Cards, based here in Kansas City, Missouri, doing mobile development there as well. One thing that I really try hard to do is if I have to do something multiple times, I absolutely hate repetitive tasks. So let me share my screen real quick. So something that I've had to do a lot, both in my day job and with any personal projects, is like uploading to app stores, uploading to any sort of development, like development build distribution service, so that your testers can get their build, test your stories, do what they need, and give you feedback. Doing that often can become really time consuming. Like one of the apps that I worked on for the startup, it literally took about 30 minutes just to do a build because it was so big. I'm sure there's a lot of things that we can optimize with that, but putting that off in some sort of continuous integration system was like exponentially increased our productivity because we just pushed our code, ran some tests against it, and make sure that we didn't break the build, and then made the build and would just push it out to our QA team. I also do that at my current job. I use different, like, if you've ever looked into continuous integration systems, there can be a lot of different options. Buddy Build was one that we've actually given a talk on before. They used to do iOS and Android builds, but now Apple actually bought them, so they only do iOS. There's other services like Jenkins. CodeMagic is one that I haven't looked into a lot, but they seem to be pretty feature rich. TFS, or Visual Studio Online, if you have like all of your user stories and stuff in there, there's components to that service that you can use as well. But today, we're going to be talking about Github Actions. So GitHub, if you've never used it, highly recommend at least checking it out. It's a Git repository. It's now owned by Microsoft, although it's hasn't, I feel like, lost a bunch of features, kind of like how Buddy Build did when Apple bought them. So it's a great option if you need a Git repository and a continuous integration system. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So throughout this session, I'm going to start with creating a new Flutter project. There's not going to be a lot of Flutter code because I feel like as developers, we get really used to the code part, which is personally what I enjoy. I imagine a lot of you do as well. So I won't do a lot of coding of the actual app, but there are a few things when the app starts or when you create the project, kind of integrating some services like Firebase. So I'll show how to do that with the Flutter project. And then kind of some different things that you have to do with the Play Store and App Store, and then hooking that into GitHub Actions. Because in order to build the app, you're going to have to run some command line. You're going to have to use the command line in order to actually build the app bundle and IPA in order to upload to the stores. So those commands will be Flutter specific. So as developers, we're used to kind of setting up our development environments. So I won't show this specifically because as a Flutter developer, I would assume you kind of already have this set up. So in general, you'll need Android Studio to do Android builds, although it's not required. You can use other things, but that's what I prefer. And I think a lot of developers probably prefer that because there's a lot of really good integrated tools. You'll need a Mac and Xcode if you want to do iOS development, and the Firebase SDK. One thing that's kind of weird about the Firebase SDK is that it does require Git. A lot of the stuff that it uses internally require Git, so you'll need that on your machine somehow. And CocoaPods if you are going to do iOS development. If you want information about that, I won't go over that in this session, like I said, but flutter.dev has a lot of really good walkthroughs and some different tips and tricks on how to get started, as well as some things along the way. So, without further ado, we'll get started. So, let me just change my screen real quick. Okay. So, there's a couple of different ways you can create a Flutter project. So one is you can do it by the command line. So that's, you can do something like Flutter create app, but it'll go through and kind of create some things. It'll walk you through some steps, but the way that I prefer it, it's totally up to you, is through Android Studio. If you have the Flutter plugin, you can click right here, and it walks you through a few things. So we'll enter our project name. This will say Flutter CI. Choose your project location, and then set your organization. So this is what's going to generate your bundle ID for iOS and your application ID on Android. It's going to combine this, put a period, and then use your project name. There's more options here if you want to use Kotlin versus Java, Swift versus Objective-C. One thing that Flutter added semi-recently are these other platforms. So you can actually create a Flutter project that supports web, supports Linux, Mac OS, and Windows. The three desktop ones are disabled here because they're not super fleshed out, I would say. If you want to enable them, it says right here you can enable it. But for today, we'll just get that. And click finish. And it'll run through some stuff. And open our project. So this initial project is really just the hello world. It doesn't do a whole lot. I can computer, I think, is going a little slow since it's using webcam and Android Studio, but we'll see if it can run this really quick. Oh, that's good. I was going to use an Android emulator, but they're not going to do it for some reason. But that's fine. So this initial project, if you run it, doesn't do a whole lot. Then, like I said, I won't talk a lot about the Flutter and Dart coding per se. We'll focus more on the extra things that you would add. So now that you have your project, say you want to integrate with some third-party service. So the way that you would do that is in this project.yaml file. So this is where all your Flutter configuration is. For anybody that doesn't know, one really popular plugin to use is Firebase. Firebase on Flutter is nicely named Flutterfire. So if you ever see that word, that's basically just the Firebase tools for Flutter. There's a couple different ways that you can get the information that you need. You can start at flutter.dev or firebase.com. But I would probably recommend starting with flutter.dev. Firebase.flutter.dev is where kind of all that Firebase stuff lives. And there's a lot of really good walkthroughs here on the different steps that you need to do in setting up your app to kind of initialize the Firebase stuff. But for now, I'm just going to add the basics. That way we can kind of get into how to set up your Firebase project with the app rather than adding the code to the app. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is kind of add some stuff to the postspec.yaml file. Just for the sake of this session, we'll say that we want to add Firebase analytics. And if you add anything to Firebase, you're going to need the Firebase core plugin as well. And then, and again, all of this information I pulled from this flutter.dev page under Android installation. So the next thing you want to do is add the dependencies to your Android project. The Firebase build scripts won't automatically change your build.gradle files, or and there's a few things on the iOS side that you need to update as well. But we'll just start for Android with Android for now. So we'll add this to our root Android build.gradle file. So that exists in this Android folder and then build.gradle. And just add it right here. And then the next thing we need to add is this line to our app module build.gradle file. So this will be sure all of the Firebase goodness is pulled into app. And then we can skip this multi-text section because we need that. And that should be it. Just to potentially populate some stuff in the Firebase console when we get there, I am going to do one small line just so that the Firebase code gets ran. So the main thing that you need to do is call this firebase.initializeApp. Obviously, if you read the instructions on Firebase's website, this is definitely not the way you should do it. I'm just doing this so that it will do something. Oh, it's not auto. Well, we'll get there when we get there. So if you want to edit anything in the Android module and you want some code completion, you do have to open the Android module itself rather than the Flutter module. So we're just going to go ahead and open that so that it imports everything. And now actually that was a Dart file, so that's not going to do us any good. Well, we'll import that when we get to that. Okay, so now we have the lines added to our app, but we don't have a Firebase project. So let's go ahead and create a Firebase project. So console.firebase.google.com is kind of the entry point into all of the Firebase services. So we'll add a project. We'll call it CI. New. We'll go ahead and enable Google Analytics and add it to our analytics account we already have and get that created. It takes a few seconds, but not too long. There we go. So now that we have our Firebase project created, we'll want to start adding our apps to it. So there's a couple different ways you can do that. Right here, since we haven't added anything, there's a quick link, or you can go into project settings and add your apps down here. So we'll add an Android app. And this will be our Android package name. If you need to find that, it will be in your build.gradle file and then this right here. But that will be that organization ID that you gave when you set up the project plus your project name. So we'll add it there. We'll add an app nickname here. This is just what it shows in Firebase to you. And for now, we'll skip this since we're not using any of the Firebase services that require it. And that's going to generate a config file. You'll want to download this file and add it to your Android application app module. So just add it into the app folder there. So here's our Android project and then the app folder. So we'll go ahead and move that over there. All right, so here's that file. This file is just how the app will authenticate with Github services. And next, we already did this because there are a few different things that to do with Flutter versus if it was just a non-Flutter Android app. So I usually prefer to go to the flutter.dev site to see those. So we'll skip that. Okay, so our Android app is added. So now let's go ahead and add our iOS app. So we'll go there. And this iOS bundle ID is going to be from the same format. Bundle IDs, when you create the Flutter project, it's not always exactly the same, the Android package name and the iOS bundle ID. One thing I've noticed is that the Flutter bundle, or the iOS bundle ID, if you add an underscore, it won't put the underscore in the bundle ID. So it's just something to watch out for. But I do know that this is the same because it's all lowercase and has no. We'll go ahead and add that app nickname too. And App Store ID we can skip right now because we haven't actually uploaded it to the App Store. And then this is going to give us a config file in a little different format than it was on Android. So we need to download that file. And this is going to go in our Xcode project under the application folder. So for Flutter, it's structured a little bit differently than a normal app. So we'll go ahead and open our iOS module just to show what that looks like. There we go. Just took a minute. Okay. So once Xcode finishes indexing all of the files that it has found, it'll show the project structure on the left here. So this info plist file that Firebase gave us is going to go right here. So Xcode also kind of formats things a little different with Xcode 15, I've noticed. It may not look exactly like it does in the instructions, but where I've been putting them and it's working is in your runner folder. So this is the main project folder where all of your code goes. So just put it right there and be sure to, actually I skipped it, so let's do that again so that I can show it. Be sure to check this copy items that we did, so that'll copy it into your project. And then be sure to check this box next to the runner target, and that'll add it to the actual package when your app is archived. There we go. So you can go ahead and close Xcode. That should be all that we need to do for now. And so now, if we actually work, here we go. Just took 3 times. So we'll go ahead and open the Android emulator. Tried to make it smaller, but going from a high density monitor to a lower one makes it a little big. Sorry about that. So if you run the app, it should hook up to Firebase's services. Actually, forgot one thing. We never finished this. So once you add the config file for Firebase, you can really skip the rest of this. It's just kind of the steps that you need in order to integrate the Firebase services into your app. But for iOS, Flutter does do that for us, so we don't have to worry about that. Okay, so now we have our Android and iOS applications sitting here. So once those config files are used to authenticate, everything can be attributed to our Firebase project. So let's build this. So we'll click Run to start building. And for this first time, we're running after a restart. We'll start the DevTools. And I have noticed this didn't used to happen. Oh, well, there wasn't an issue. So usually code completion will kind of handle this for you, where when you type something, I did forget something a long time ago. So as a Flutter dev, since Flutter is not my main language, I forget this sometimes. Once you add something to your pubspec.yaml, it needs to pull these plugins from the Flutter plugin repos. So we need to do a pub get. Usually, this sticks up here and you're supposed to see it when you're doing something, but I missed that. So we'll do a Flutter pub get, pull the Firebase packages. There we go. Okay, so now if I start typing, usually it does some code completion to figure out what package I'm trying to use. I was preparing for this talk, I updated some of my software, so there must be a bug in some of that. Let's see here. Input that. This. Oh, from Firebase core, not Firebase. Fair enough. There we go. Okay, now that everyone right. And love semicolons. So go ahead and stop this, rerun it. There we go. So it'll run, in the background, it's running Flutter run, which builds the app for whatever your target is. So in this case, it's an APK for the emulator. If the target was the Iowa simulator, it would build the debug IPA and install it on the simulator for us. First time that you run it sometimes takes a little bit. So for the sake of time, we might skip this just because it may take a little bit. So say that you have your apps ready to give to a QA person or give to your friends to test, something like that. You'll need, well, I guess first, you want to make sure that you don't miss your code. So my preferred source control is Git. That's pretty standard with iOS and Android development. So let's go ahead and get that going. So Android Studio has this terminal tab, which will start in your project folder, and it will start at the Flutter project. So it's just something to kind of recognize is you are kind of going through along the CI path. You're kind of testing the commands that you may give. If you're wanting something specific to Android, you'll probably want to go to the Android folder. But by default, this just goes to the root project folder, which is our Flutter app. So we'll go ahead and get repo set up. So now everything in the code base is committed to a local Git repository. But to be sure that I really don't lose this, because if my computer goes down or my hard drive goes bad, then I wouldn't have access to it. It's probably a good idea to use some sort of remote source control repository. So for the sake of today's conversation and session, we'll use GitHub. If you haven't used GitHub before, there are private and public repositories. since GDG is a nonprofit, we get free private repositories, but it costs money usually to have more than, I think, 5 or so. And I'll get a little bit more into pricing and how that can kind of not be super straightforward with GitHub Actions. I'll get to that a little later. So for this, we'll start with the public repository. Okay. Won't worry about the rest of it, just because this is just for the day. Okay, so now we have our repository. We'll want to be sure that our local repository gets hooked up to this remote repository. The way you do that is by adding remote. So really in this, I did kind of the rest of this already. So this is the important part, actually these two right here. So first we'll add that remote. So now there's a reference to our GitHub repository. Now we'll go ahead and do this. So this is going to push this branch up to GitHub. Okay, I guess we'll ignore that error. Not sure why that happened. Okay, so now if we go back here, refresh, it should show our code. So this is our Flutter project with our Android app, iOS app, and then the Flutter code. I hope to see this, but that's good. So now that we have our code up in the GitHub repository, we can talk about how to automate release processes. So GitHub, I think maybe a year or two ago, I think it was after the Microsoft purchase, added a feature called GitHub Actions. It's basically you can add different triggers to different workflows, and based on those triggers, they can start jobs. So each job then can have different steps, and each job can be dependent on other jobs. So it's a pretty robust system, and there's a lot of community support. You can actually write different actions and release them to the public so that others can kind of use your pre-made action. And we'll actually use some of those today because there are a lot of people that are Android developers and have to do this. And so they were kind enough to kind of write some of the things that we're going to do today. So to create a workflow in GitHub Actions, there is this Actions tab on the repo. There are a few different kind of pre-made workflows. If you're deploying Node.js to an Azure web app, there's a pre-made workflow for that. Basically, anything that starts with actions / is going to be something that GitHub, I think, made. And I'll show you some stuff that is community driven later that wasn't created by GitHub. So for today, we're just going to set up our own template. So that'll create a file in the root of your repo, .github / workflows directory, and then everything in here is going to be considered a workflow. This file is a YAML file, so as a Flutter developer, you're probably a little used to that, since that's the pub specs are in the same file format. So the biggest thing that took me a while to get used to I had done Python development in college for one class, and everything else has been a little more of a modern syntax. But just like Python, in YAML, indentation matters. So be sure that if you put an extra space on something, you kind of realize that, and be sure that all your indentation lines up. So this file here is just kind of the hello world for GitHub action. So a GitHub action has an optional name. You don't have to get that. You set all of your triggers in an on section, and then all of your jobs are put into a job section. So we will, I'm actually going to totally wipe this out, and I'm just going to start from scratch and kind of build as we go. So we'll start with the name. For this, we'll say it's build and release. Yeah. And then to set triggers, it'll be in an on block. So there's a couple of different options that we have. The first is going to be on push. So this means if the so this means that there's a trigger for if anybody pushes to any branch that's listed in this array. And for now, since we're just putting everything in the master branch for this session, we just are going to say master there. If you're doing it for like it's a pretty big app and you have several developers and you have scheduled releases, you may have a develop branch that is kind of leads your development code. You may want to put that there. That way, on any develop branch pushes, you can send the app to your testers. This is really customizable here. And then the second trigger that we'll have is workflow dispatch. This trigger is basically just means a manual trigger. So it's not required, but it's something that I've been adding to any GitHub Action workflows that I've done, just because there may be some time where I just want to rerun a workflow because I changed something, like a setting in some backend service that didn't require a code commit, but running it again may actually change the outcome. Okay. I think we have a trigger set up. We'll actually go into defining the job. So jobs are defined in the jobs instance, and each job has starts out with a name. So this one we'll call build, and then within that build job, first thing that we need to define is what kind of machine it runs on. So for Android, we're going to run it on Ubuntu, and since OS version probably doesn't matter a lot with that, we'll just say Linux. So the format for this is typically the platform. So we can also say Windows or Mac OS, and then which version. You can say version Windows 10. You can say Mac OS 15 or 11.15. Sorry, 10.15. Anything like that. And then after that, we're going to define the steps that this job runs. So this is where, personally, I feel like the format gets a little weird. I haven't used a lot of YAML, so maybe this is just kind of a normal thing. But each step starts with a hyphen. This is kind of defines the start of that step, and then you say what you want to do. So there's a couple different ways that you can define a step. You can say If you want to just run just a command line command, you can say run hello world. That'll actually run. It'll show in the logs that it echoed out hello world. If you want to do a multi-line command, you can add a vertical line. Line. Forgot indentation matters. So since these are kind of parts of the run property, they should be indented in front of that run word. So this would echo hello world, and then it would echo again. And then if you want to use kind of a pre-made command, you'll start with uses. You declare that with uses. So the first thing that most workflows will do will be uses action/checkout. So this is an action within something that GitHub manages, since it starts with actions, and then it's the checkout action. And then at the end of that, you'll put which version. So this literally lives in a repo, a GitHub repo, and then this is a release that repo has. Is kind of how that works. Okay, so if we were to run this, if we were to commit this to the repository, to the master branch, this would actually start. Indentation matters. So that error was there because I had that indented under the push trigger, but this is not really a property of push. It's its own trigger. So again, indentation matters. I will definitely, that will not be the last time I say that during the session. Okay, so if we were to commit this to the master branch, since we have a trigger with this runs on pushes to the master branch, this would just check out the repo and then hint. But we want to do more than that. So when you're developing Flutter on your local machine, there's a lot of setup that you do ahead of time. So you install Android Studio, you set up Java on your machine, you download the Flutter SDK, all those things you do. Well, these machines that run in GitHub's resource pool aren't set up for every option, so you kind of have to tell it what things you need. Lucky for us, there are a few pre-made actions. So for copy paste it now. There's a few things that we'll need. For Android, make an Android app using Java. So this is an action to set up Java, and we're just going to use the first version. And then if you have a pre-made action that needs some sort of properties, then we'll use the keyword with, and then within that with keyword, we'll define all of our properties and values. So this action needs a Java version property, and we'll pass it 12.x. So this will install the Java version 12.x. I think it does the latest 12. Okay, so then next we need the Flutter SDK. GitHub probably doesn't care a lot about Flutter. They may care, but it would be weird if they made their own kind of Flutter SDK download. So there is a user that created an action called Flutter Action. And that this one is optional, I believe. I think, I don't remember if the master branch of the Flutter repo is default or stable is default. But it's probably good just to define it anyway in case that functionality changes. So this action takes a channel property. We're going to pass it stable because we don't need any beta code, or we don't need the latest from the master branch. Okay. So now that we have that, if we were to commit this, check out, set up Java, download the Flutter SDK, and exit. In real life, if you were going to build this, you would want to actually build the app next. But there's a couple of things that we still need to set up. So one thing that I absolutely despise doing is code signing. It's definitely required. It's very important. Always sign your code, but it just gets very cumbersome. So we're going to walk through that really quick, hopefully, and I'll show you guys how to add that into this. Okay. So the first thing we're going to want to do for Android, so every Android app needs typically has a debug code signing and a release code signing. That way, anything you use in the App Store, is intended for the App Store, and anything you give, anything you develop locally, just uses your local Android debug Keystore. So we're going to go ahead and create what will become our release Keystore. So the easiest way to do that, I guess first, don't take my word for it, and also there's 1,000 ways to do it. So typically what I do, especially for Flutter things, is just go to flutter.dev. They have a really good walkthrough on signing the app specifically. And typically when you need to do it, I either go to the Flutter website or the Android website. They give you exactly the commands to use on Mac, Linux, and Windows, and then walk you through kind of one way to do it in your Android app. Again, there's multiple ways, but this honestly is the way that I've used it in personal apps, started by Work for, and on any corporate job I've had. It's really straightforward and easy to do. So just doing the steps that are listed here, we're going to run this. So this is going to use the keygen tool on Mac. We're going to create a Keystore, give it a name. So remember what you named it. And then the rest of these are just kind of the standard values to use. But do know eventually it's going to expire. I think, if I remember right, there is a max. I don't recall what it is. 10,000 is just kind of always what I personally used. And then it's kind of standard, I feel like, for an Android app is to have an alias called upload, because we're going to use an app bundle. We're not going to do it here today. Okay, so once you do that, you're going to want to give it a password. I'm just going to do ASDF, because this app doesn't matter. So this is going to be the information for your certificate. Well, it says your first name and last name. I don't usually prefer to do it that way. To me, this is the Flutter CI upload certificate, so it's really for the Flutter CI. And really, all of this information is just to identify it later, pretty much. So give it values that make sense to you, and we'll make our Keystore. Okay, so now we have our Keystore, and it's located right here. So I actually made this at the Flutter root project. Probably not the best place to put it, because if I do a git status, it's going to show up, because git ignore is not going to ignore that JKS file with a Flutter root. But I will go ahead and move that to Apple. So if I go to my Android to my Android folder, I now have an upload Keystore file there. And by default, Flutter does add some gitignore files. And this one in the Android folder does contain any JKS, so JKS or Keystore. Okay, so now that we've created our Keystore, we'll go ahead and create our properties file that we use to sign the app. So that file, if you've never really done this before, the way that we're going to do this is set our signing config values based on the values in a key.properties file. That way, we can have the key.properties file sitting on our local file system, but not commit it to the repo. And you can see in this gitignore, there is a key.properties file here. So any key.properties file, Git is just going to totally ignore. That way we don't commit it to a public repo accidentally. So we're going to make this in the Android app module. So we'll go new file. Actually, sorry, that was wrong. We're going to make that in the Android folder. So key.properties file is going to be referenced from our Android project root. Okay, so then in that file, we're going to have a few items. So we scroll down here. Flutter gives us a really nice little template. So our Keystore password, SDF, please make your password better than that. For sake of this. And then the store file, we call it upload-keystore.jks. Okay, so now that we have that there, this file can be referenced from our app module load.data file. Google gives a really good walkthrough of this, so I'm going to copy and paste some of this. So this section is going to pull the key.properties contents and store it in a properties variable called Keystore properties. It doesn't really matter where in your Gradle file you put this. I usually put it at the top since there's a bunch of other def lines, but it can go anywhere as long as it's before where you're actually going to use this Keystore properties variable. And then we're going to want to go to our build types block, which should look like this right now, but we're going to want to change it to be all of this. So what this does is sets up a signing config for our release build type. It pulls the key alias value out, puts that key alias variable, key password out, puts that in the key password variable, pulls out the store file, and then if it exists, puts it in the store file variable and save the store password. Okay, so if everything's set up correctly, which cross your fingers that it is, we should be able to build the app now. One thing I would recommend is if you've changed anything with codespec.yaml file or potentially anything with like signing configs or anything else that would kind of affect the build artifacts, usually best to do a Flutter Clean. But be sure that all the build directories are cleared. You can kind of see what it does. It cleans the Xcode workspace, which we didn't really touch. Went ahead and did that. And then does a Gradle clean and cleans out all of the folder guys. Okay, so now if we do Flutter build app bundle, so this will by default run the release build type. So it'll take a little bit because it has to do with Flutter get, has to build the app, and the last thing it'll do is it'll sign the app bundle. And one thing that I kind of ran into as I was coming up with the script for the session, it's not something you'll run into too much when you already have an established app, if you're adding a continuous integration system to it. But if you're just starting and want to automate some of these things before you release to the Play Store, if you try to release using the Play API to an app that's still in draft status, it can sometimes give you some different errors depending on which GitHub action you use. I ended up finding a GitHub action that worked with the statuses that we'll see today. So we shouldn't have any issues. But if you see anything that's says something about like a release status not matching, or can't release a draft, or can't release an app to a draft track, then basically what you have to do is make just one release to an internal close, or sorry, to not the internal track, to a closed track, and just not add anyone. So that makes a release. The app's not really in draft status anymore, and you can upload to it. So this error is saying that I put the Keystore in the wrong folder. So we're just going to go ahead and move that Keystore to the app folder and rerun that. So that came up. That was something that was a little confusing to me when I started using GitHub Actions and kind of automating some of this stuff. Is the app build.gradle file, when it pulls the file, the code that flutter.dev gives you uses the project root to find the key.properties file, and then when it pulls the store file, it just says file, which pulls from the current directory, which the current directory of the app build.gradle file is the app module. So you can change that and kind of customize it for what your needs are if you want. Which is something I ran into. It was kind of odd. Okay, so once this command finishes, it'll go spit out an app bundle file that's signed. And for the sake of time, we will assume that that finishes. So now that we have all of our signing set up in the Gradle file, we can now use that. We can now we have to give the GitHub Actions stuff all of this information. So the way to do that in GitHub, okay, there it did finish. So that app bundle is in the build artifacts. So if we need to upload it, that single kind of first use bundle, you just go there and do that. So now the way that we give kind of secret information to GitHub is using GitHub Secrets. So those are located in Settings and then Secrets. So the actions in our workflow can actually access some of these GitHub secrets. So if we wanted to, obviously we wouldn't do that here, but if we wanted to give a secret to this value, we would start out with secrets, and then whatever the secret name is. So that would actually pull the value at this name from the secrets and pass it into this channel property. So on the secrets page, in the Actions tab, you can create one using this new repository secret here. So here's where you put the name, and we will do our key.properties file first. So we can just take data and put it right in there. That secret. So now, anytime we want to access this, we can do so like that. So, so the first thing that we're going to want to do, or the next thing we're going to do, is we're going to run some explicit commands. So, just like here, where I did Flutter build app bundle, we're going to want to kind of set up all the stuff on the command line to prepare for this. So the kind of standard way that I've been doing it is to echo out this. So try don't mistype it. So we're echoing out that secrets value and then putting it in a file in the Android platform folder called key.properties. One thing that I did run into a few times, if your secret has quotes in it, GitHub just literally replaces this this variable here with the contents. So if your secret has a quote, it's going to be like value equals quote, which now you just have a string here, and then that's going to cause some issues on the line. They aren't going to be super. It's just going to look weird in the logs. So just be very cautious of use like single quotes versus double quotes. It's probably just easiest to use single quotes all the time. There's something to watch out for. So now that we have our key.properties file, we need our keystore. So since a keystore is a binary file, we can't really give the letters that represents unless we do something like a base64 encoding of it. So we're going to base64 encode our keystore and put it in this value so that when we echo it out, we can then decode that base64 and then put it in a file. Don't forget to put it in your app module and then call it the same thing that your key.properties is expecting. At the end of the day, this name doesn't really matter as long as what you put in your key properties secret matches that. Okay, so now we're going to base64 encode our keystore. So we're in our Android platform folder, and we go to our app folder. We see our keystore right there. So we want to base64. The file is upload that keystore. And just to make things easy, I'm going to pipe that out to my clipboard. That way I can just paste it in and know that I'm not going to configure anything. Although you really don't want to type all this out because that's quite a long string. So I'll set the name for this secret there. And okay, so we have our key.properties file and our keystore now sitting on this remote machine. If you wanted, you can use the same command line stuff here, but just because I like things to be very clear what's part of the same step, I am just going to make a new run command here. So first thing that we're going to do is flutter get. The Flutter run or Flutter build is going to do this for you, but I usually just prefer to do this out the gate, make sure that everything works as you expect, and then we're going to do Flutter build app bundle. So after this is ran, so hit the Flutter images, and then we build the app bundle. Every time that this runs, it's always going to have the build number and build version that's listed here in our pubspec.yaml. My preference is to drive build numbers off of the number of code commits since the beginning of history in the repo that you're in. I know different people have different preferences. Some people like using like a build number. So if on your first build it's 1, on your second build your system automatically picks that up and just sets it to 2. I don't personally like that, because if you rerun a build, then you can't really know where that build came from unless you go back to your build system. Whereas if it's based on the number of Git commits, you know exactly what code that came from. If you were wanting to alter that yourself, you can go to flutter.dev and find some documentation where they actually give you some nice comments up here. We can use build name, which will change this version number here, or build number, which will change this second version number here. So what we'll do is build number, like that. And I copied this so much, I don't know that I could come up with it on my own, because I'm not a Git command wizard. But this is the command that you do in order to run kind of number of commits since beginning of history. And you can see that if I run this here, it says 1, because I just did the 1 commit. But once we commit this workflow to the repository, that would then be 2 commits. Okay. So now once we run this, it'll build the app, but it'll just sit there on the machine and nothing will happen to it. And it'll actually be discarded after the workflow's done. So what we'll want to do is upload it somewhere. So you have a couple options. If one thing that I usually try to do is upload it to this like job run. Each job can have artifacts attached to it. The one nuance with that is that there is a cost to doing that some. So for public repos, which is why I chose this to be a public repo, it's totally free. Your storage doesn't count towards any quota. You get unlimited storage. If you have a private repo, you only have, I think, 1 gig of storage, which for the personal app that I wrote got filled up pretty quickly with iOS builds, because those things are massive. So just kind of weigh how that works for you, and you can choose whether you want to upload it to this build or just upload it to the store without kind of saving the archive. It's up to you. So the next, so I should do that. So this is going to use a pre-made action. And that action is upload artifact. And there is a v2, so it has a solves a few bugs. So we'll go ahead and use that. And then this requires a bunch of things. So it needs the path to whatever file you're doing. There's a couple of different ways you can do that. You can just kind of assume what that is, or you can find it for yourself. I'm just going to assume where it is, because I know that every time that app builds, it's going to be output to right here. So I'm just going to copy that. So in the current directory, it's put right there. And then, and actually, we'll leave that there for now, but I'm going to show a way to kind of simplify that. That way you're not just passing a static string. And then this is going to be the name of the artifact once it's uploaded. So this will actually show on the workflow run itself. So instead of, oh, and I'll also mention these don't have to match. You can call this whatever you want. You can call this .kaab, even though this file name is different. It really just uploads this file and gives it this name. But we'll keep it the same. So in this scenario, we're actually going to upload it to the GitHub workflow as well as the Play Store. So since this string would need to go in 2 places, I'll show you how to put this in a variable that you can use across steps. The way that I typically do that is using ID. So if there are ways to output variables to kind of this whole workflow so that you can use variables across steps. To do that, you have to define an ID. That way you can reference back to this steps output. So we'll call this just build, since we're building the app. And then we're going to save just a local environment variable called bundle path. And that's going to be the present working directory. That way it gives an explicit file path just in case. And then that path that I know where that's going to be. And then to store that in steps output, we're going to echo out a specific format. So for this, it's going to be 2 colons, set-output. This name is going to be how you reference this in later steps. And then 2 colons, then the value that you want to assign to it. So if I wanted, I really could put, this here. So this is going to be a variable called bundle path, an output variable called bundle path that has a value of this. And since this is really running command lines, this PWD will expand when it's run. But just so it's cleaner, I usually try to set the next. So now to reference this, use a similar format to secrets, but with just a few different things. So we're no longer referencing secrets. We're referencing things in the steps context within GitHub Actions. So, so each step will have a value, but since we only assign one an ID, we'll use the same ID right here. And then it's the outputs of that step, and then it's the name that we assign to it. So in the steps context, we give the ID of whatever step we want, so that's right here. So if this was ASDF, this would be ASDF. And then each step has an outputs that has the list of all of the values that we gave out. So this right here will match the string that we give here. Okay. So now if we ran this, it would build the app and then upload it as an artifact to this workflow. Our end goal is really to upload it to the stores, right? Because we want to be able to test it, we want to be able to give it to users. That's really our end goal. So the way that we do that is first, we need to authenticate with the Play API. So there is, someone did write a really nice action called Upload Google Play. That it takes in your credentials with the Play API, your package name, and what file and track you want to upload to, and then we'll actually upload it. One note with this, the latest version, as of yesterday, I didn't check today if there was a new one, but the latest version was 1.0.16, which you can also reference just by the v1. That actually has, like I was talking about before, kind of a weirdness if your app is in draft mode. So when you haven't released you haven't released the app yet. So in order to kind of get around that bug, you can just reference the version before it, which is 1.0.15, and that one did not have that issue. Okay, so the first thing that we'll need is our credentials of the Play API. There are a few different ways that we can do that. One is directly in the Cloud Console, but I usually prefer to go in through the Play Console. So on your Play Console, under API Access, you can create a service account. So I'm actually not going to use this one. Since this was my test one that I made before, we're going to go ahead and create a new one. So create a new service account, and then it kind of walks you through the steps for this. So the first thing we're going to do is go to the Google Cloud Platform. And then if you don't already have a Google Play Console project created, it'll walk you through the steps to create that. Once you're done with it, just be sure that the Google Play Console developer, whatever project you created to hold these keys, is what's selected up here. Otherwise, you're going to create these keys for a different project, and you may not be able to find these keys later. So for now, I'm actually going to delete these old keys. So this is probably what you would see. So the first thing you want to do is create service accounts. Give it some sort of descriptive name. I usually prefer having one key per app I want to upload. That way, like if one key is lost because I uploaded it to a public repo, it's not giving everyone access to do everything in my account. So we'll call this the Flutter CI. You can change the account ID if you want. It just has to be linked across all of the cloud. And we'll create that. The one step I almost always forget every single time is that in order for a service account to work, you have to assign it some sort of role. For the purposes of the Play API access, I really think I've kind of tried to play around with which role is the minimum. I think any will work because really all it needs is read access. So if you just give it the viewer access, it should be fine. Click continue in this section. Repeat. Okay, so now we have our service account created. So it's created, but we don't have a key for it yet. So if you go in the Actions menu, click Manage Keys, we don't have any keys yet. So what we want to do is add a key, create a new key. For this action that we're going to use, this pre-made action, it I think still works with a P12, but just because we don't really want to go through the whole base64 encoding and that sort of thing, we'll just go ahead and do a JSON format and create. So that'll give us this JSON file that we can add to the secrets and then pass to the action. So we can close that window, and then in the Play Console, click Done. It'll refresh the service account list, and we want to grant it access. So now this is where we say what permissions to give this service account. So this service account really exists like a user in our Play Console. So we can give it any sort of permissions like we could any other user. So for this, we don't need it to create or publish private apps. It doesn't need anything with game services. It doesn't need to create any apps or release to production. But what it does need to do is release to testing tracks. And I don't think this one's necessary for what we need, but since it has to do with testing tracks, in case we want to expand what this does later, we can do that. We don't want to manage our precedents or have it applying to any users. So by user, this will automatically be accepted, and that key now should be able to should be usable for what we need. So what we'll want to do is open that file in your favorite text editor. And it looks like this. So looks like a service account authentication JSON file. We're going to want to copy all of that and then put it in a new secret. So we'll put that there. And add it. And let me show you what we got. So now we have Keystore upload service account JSON. Probably could have came up with this already. Okay, so now we need to pass all the values that this actually needs. So first thing is I need to paste this because it's so it has a service account JSON plain text value. So all properties have to go underneath that with blocks. So the JSON value for the key goes in this property called service account JSON plain text. The package name, so we know what package name is assigned to, goes to and this is the Android package name. So just make sure that, because the bundle ID could be different, that this actually matches the package name listed in your app, your build.gradle file in your app module. And then we'll need the release files. This can be an array or it cannot, that's fine. And we will put this same file out there. And then since we don't, for purposes of this talk, we'll just release it to an internal track. And that should work. So, one thing that we haven't done yet is actually create our app. So this app was one that I created to kind of make the script for this, but we'll want to go ahead and create the app really quick. And that way you guys have an upload to. Okay. So first thing, this app, Google doesn't know what application ID that this has, so that when we upload our new builds, it can be assigned to it. So the first thing that we'll do is take this we will take this app bundle and actually upload it to that closed testing track. That way this isn't considered a draft release anymore. A couple things you need to do that we can get through pretty quick is set which countries. And we don't have to set testers in our each release, so we'll skip that. Edit and upload that file. So once this is done, it'll actually associate the application ID with the play listing. That way, when we upload with the GitHub workflow, it will associate those apps correctly. We'll come back to that. And I also want to be sure that the internal track is created. That way, it knows that that's a good track. Okay, now it's done. So we'll save that. Hope that it doesn't give us any errors. But probably will because we have to give the description. Well, running it's probably going to fail because we have to go through the store listing stuff. But we can at least show that it's uploading. Okay, so now that we've set up our environment, we've set up code signing, we've made the build with a incrementing build number, we've uploaded to this workflow run so that we have access to that app bundle once this is finished as part of GitHub. And finally, we upload to Keystore. So this file can really be edited anywhere. Be sure that all of your workflow files have nicknames. Personally, I like to kind of do things by platform. It doesn't make sense to have the Android and iOS builds kind of run in the same workflow, because if something fails and it fails for everything, it's nice to have things very serial so that nothing's really running in parallel, and when something fails, it doesn't crash everything. So we'll rename this to Android and commit and cross our fingers that it will work. So this, once we commit the file, it shows that file there in the GitHub workflows folder, and we can see the status of everything in the Actions tab. So if you click on that, so this page will show the different workflows. You can see all workflows or specific workflows, and then this is a run of this workflow. So we'll click on that run. And then within this run, there are multiple jobs. And if you had more, there would kind of be like a dependency list here, showing the different jobs. So we can click on this job and actually see the logs. So it already checked out, set up Java, it's currently setting up the Flutter Sdk, and then should get things afterwards. I would expect this to take, when I was testing it, I think it took maybe 4 or 5 minutes, so I won't just sit on the screen the whole time. I'll talk about some other things. You can kind of see the log show live if you want. So for the sake of time, I won't go through all of the iOS steps, but they're pretty similar. We have I'll probably end up adding it to this repo that I made today, just so that it's all nice and tidy. But I did make one working workflow file. It's pretty similar, where you check out the repository, you set up all the things that you need. In this workflow, I used CodeMagic, which has some CLI tools that you can use. They were pretty nice to work with code signing, and ended up uploading using a tool within CodeMagic. So you do all the signing, used kind of the similar base64 idea to encode binaries and then decode them in the workflow. Built the IPA using Flutter build IPA and the same build number concept. Uploaded the artifact to the workflow run, and then finally uploaded to the App Store, which obviously would require an account with the App Store, paying the developer fee, and setting up the app. similar to how we did in Google Play. Okay, let's see if, nope, still building. Okay, well, I think that is pretty much everything I have. If anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. I'll kind of leave this up so we can see it finish, hopefully. Roger or Martin, I don't know if there are any questions in the chat.
Oops. What did I do? I'm not sure, but you're muted right now. Sorry about that. Come on. Hey, Jay, can you hear me okay? Because I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I was
Okay,
trying
cool.
to like relay, but
Oh, sorry.
but somehow you got muted and then I wasn't muted. So
Oh, no worries.
So we do have one question from Robert there.
So outside of the flutter.dev deployment documents, are there any good write-ups of these steps that you can recommend? Well, so as part of this and like writing the script for this, I realized I'm writing a really good technical document. So I did publish an article to Medium. When we send out the slides after this, or maybe I can find it really quick. I'll put a link to that. It's basically just everything that I talked about, showing the code, showing the steps, but in a written format. It was my first attempt at making a technical Medium post, so don't like give me a hard time if it's terrible. Yeah, so there's that. Flutter.dev I definitely would look at. Honestly, I feel like Flutter.dev I used for most of this, and that's pretty much where I start when I have any questions about, how do I do this? Yeah, I really think Flutter.dev is kind of, that's at least where I would start, and then maybe, Google some things. GitHub Actions, if you have any questions about that, they have their documentation is very in-depth. It looks very Microsoft-y. So if you've not perused Microsoft documentation, just be patient. But GitHub Actions, I think it's github.com/features/actions is where their documentation is. And then GitHub/actions is where they keep all of their self-hosted kind of like pre-made packages.
I do believe they have some videos on their YouTube channel on GitHub Actions that they've probably posted in the last month or so.
Oh, cool.
Either on their Microsoft developer channel or the Microsoft YouTube channel. So those would be some good sources too if you want to actually hear them kind of talk about GitHub Actions. I know they've been flooding my subscription timeline on my YouTube channel in the last month or so. So with a lot of different content.
So I just put in the chat the Medium post. While I have a working iOS workflow, I didn't add it to the Medium post because I knew that I would run out of time. I kind of already did. So I knew that I wouldn't really get to it for this session, but I do plan on updating it afterwards. if I'm going to try to get through all of these Play Store things really quick.
Does anybody else have any questions about GitHub Actions and the stuff that he did today?
So this is one of those scenarios where it's good to add that. Let me share my screen again. Where it's sometimes good to add that that workflow dispatch trigger, because so let me go to the action viewer file. So this workflow dispatch, if you'll remember, is for manual runs, whereas this push is for the like automated triggers when you push a branch. So if I hadn't added this, then this button right here wouldn't exist. So since I updated a backend system to kind of handle an error that I saw, I can choose which branch to run from, but all I have is master, and then click run workflow. So it creates a new workflow run just based on a manual trigger. And not that you have to stay, but I really would just want to see this end up getting uploaded. Yeah. So yeah, does anybody else have any questions? I'll move this so that I can see. In the video, I plan on putting on our GDG YouTube channel, so you should be able to reference this. I'll be sure to add the links to the slides, links to any of the websites that I went to, anything like that. And I guess as some wrap up things while we're waiting, so if you're familiar with GDGs or GDG Kansas City, we typically pre-COVID ran Def SKC about every year. Since COVID, we haven't had an in-person one, but did kind of team up with some of the Midwest GDGs to make an online one. We will likely do that again this year, but we're not sure of date or like what platform it's going to be on or anything. It will be virtual if it happens. So if you're interested in that, just be on the lookout. If you found us on Flutter events, we post all of our events on our meetup. You can just search for GDG Kansas City, or all GDGs kind of use a platform that you can get to using gdg.community.dev. And you should be able to find us there as well, and all the other GDGs if you're interested in seeing their stuff. Nothing like watching log files come across the screen.
My Jenkins build's like that too. It was like watching paint dry.
And I definitely we weren't sponsored by anyone, so if you hate GitHub Actions, that's totally fine. But the ideas should be pretty much the same across any continuous integration system. at work, like for my day job, use TFS. We have an on-prem version, so it's a little weird about how we have to have our own build machines that do things and stuff like that. So those have options. Github Actions also has where you can host your own runners, I think they call them.
Yeah, GitLab also can do CLCI. If you've ever used that one before.
I haven't used GitLab for CI stuff. I've used the repo, but other CI stuff. Well, it didn't work because I apparently signed with the wrong key at some point. So had things worked correctly, it would have said, well, actually, I have this. Oh, that's iOS. And I would love to say that there was only one run and it worked on the first time for this, but I deleted all of the wrong ones so that you didn't have to search through them. Okay, so it would say probably those three things I didn't get to. So it saw the internal track. Or sorry, it probably got to this and then failed because it wouldn't have successfully uploaded the artifact if the signing keys were different. And then it adds the artifact to the track, commits that track, and then says that everything's done. So that's what a successful one would look like.
I was going to say a demo isn't official unless you had at least one failed.
Well, I also had a lot of typos during the code, so that's good.
I saw nothing.
Thanks. All right. Well, I appreciate everybody coming and hope it was helpful. If you have any questions, definitely feel free to reach out to me. Or if you have any questions about GDG or meetups, reach out to Roger Barton or me. And yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah, I did post our Slack channel in the chat right before he started, so feel free to join our Slack, and you can also ask us questions there. Plus, we have a good community of people there that you can ask questions about.
Definitely. Thanks, everyone.